Good morning and welcome to our 8 a.m. working session on the budget. It is September 20th, 2022. Let the record reflect that all three commissioners are present and our executive management team, and we are going to start off this morning with purchasing. So I don't know, Gary, if you want to just kind of start off with the morning.
Just a quick overview on the purchasing budget for the preliminary submitted budget for Tony's department. It's $1.3 million in the general fund. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tony.
All right. A little deceiving. The name of the department is purchasing, but today I'm here to talk about the project management department, which is a subsection of the purchasing department now as of the 1st of 2022. So really high level on this, wanted to run through a history of the project management department and how the evolution has happened over the last year. And it started out, there's one project manager specifically in IT that grew to 2 project managers around this time last year. Again, specifically just working on IT related projects, software integration, stuff like that. In January of 2022, we moved to a enterprise-wide project management office, and that was shifted from the IT department into purchasing. And what that means is that the scope grew exponentially. So not just software integrations anymore. We're talking really any cross-functional or cross-functional project where you have multiple departments working together on the same project. It has to be pretty complex in nature and, again, affecting and involving multiple departments in a project. That, just to summarize the supplementals that I put down for this year. As we grow, these are what I believe we need to stay on track and keep up with the pace of projects that are coming at us. So the first ask is 1 business analyst, and this person would really act as an agent of change, bringing in new ways of visualizing complex problems. So when you guys ask for additional data on something, a lot of times if it's a complex multi-department projects, it's very hard for us to track down data or, again, have the time and expertise to get that data for you. So we feel like a business analyst would benefit you guys quite a bit in clarifying that data and helping cross-function get the bridge. So, hard data. The one example that I wanted to bring out where a business analyst would be very helpful, we have a upcoming project for a public works customer service department. So not department, but a customer service zone, I would say. So when you walk in the public works building, instead of being lost, not knowing where to go, there would be a dedicated customer service section and possibly all of the customer facing services that we provide in one place on the entry floor of the building. So with that, we need to track, with 4 or 5 departments in that building, what customer service functions are being done, who in that department would need to move into that central location, and tracking the frequency at which they are meeting with face-to-face customers. So that could be done very easily with deploying a business analyst over there and teaching them how to capture that data and the best way to visualize it and share it. It's one good example. There's a million more that we could use a business analyst for. So with the ERP project coming up and another one, the Clean Building Act, so getting all of our buildings up to a clean standard, a lot of business analyst work could go into pulling the data that we need to be successful and really getting ahead of these issues before they run us over. So the last part that a business analyst could help with, that I've written down here at least, is continuous improvement. So really a focus on how do we improve our processes, how do we progress and not get to a point where our processes and our systems are 20 years out of date like we are right now. And the second part of that, with any good project management department, you have a training, you provide tools for the departments. So teaching them how to fish type of scenario so that there isn't as much project management department involvement, but we're creating a culture of this is how you perform projects in the right way. And I'll get into it a little bit more, but the ask for a new project manager is really being kicked off by the increase in demand, especially from the law and justice side. So I've got Mike here with me, who in a couple slides can clarify what increased demand really means and have a few probably specified projects for you. And really right now, we can't get to any new high priority projects at the current level that we're at. We're, I would say for the next 12 to 18 months, can't really take on many more projects. And again, I'll get to a visual that has that make a little more sense for you. And another thing that this project manager would help with, and something that we've vowed to Scott, is that we won't just finish projects and not report out on the successes of them. So another project manager, I feel, would help us get that post project successes out there, communicated, working with Jared and everybody to really highlight the successes that we have and really capture data of the successes too. That's pretty much it. Those are the summary of the two asks that I'm looking for. So next slide, if you could, Ron. Oh, this is really small for you guys to see on the screen. That's right. So high level, just wanted to give you a snapshot of the last 10 months, year to date. We've completed 5 projects, which is pretty standard for 1.5 project managers, I would say. We have one that's been here with us the whole time, a new one that started 5 months ago. So fairly indicative of the workload. And you'll see on there, so 8th Avenue building, sale and relocation of that. We have a P-card workflow, some software upgrades for the court department or the court system. Grants really helped them when they were in a bind before Arian started, to get a few modules, a few tracking systems up and running, and then for detention services, finally getting their Securus communication project done. I already clarified the scope, so all good on that one. That is what it looks like this year. Next slide, Ron. And this is our current workload. So you can see the contrast between what we've done this year and what our pipeline looks like. So highlighted in gray on the left are 2 projects that by themselves are really the responsibility of one project manager. So the ERP project and the Green Buildings Act. And you can see quite a few more projects beyond that. At the bottom, you can see kind of in that peach color down there, we have 5 projects that are just awaiting capacity. Some of those are very impactful. So paperless benefits for the HR department, that affects every employee that we have here. We'll really expedite that process. Geiger kitchen replacement. I mentioned the Public Works customer service centric plan over there. So with that, the projects that are highlighted in green are projects that I will need to basically reassign to accommodate the drastic increase in need in law and justice. So there's 7 projects that I need to reassign, and at this point, I don't really have any capacity to assign those to anybody. And this is Mike. I have you kind of in for this one, but for law and justice related, to dig into that, there are 8 current projects that he has going. I believe more than 10. If you could, next slide, Ron. Much more than 10 in his pipeline beyond this. So I'll let you kind of.
Okay, you want me to chime in here? So on the video court and booths for detention services, there's a need to have the ability to conduct hearings and court sessions up on the floors inside the jail. And this is a project that we started last year, a spinoff of the blueprint of reform. The new jail project has been an ongoing process that Ken Moore and I have been working on. The warrant spun off of the IRC and the need for law enforcement officers to have the ability to read their warrants and conduct their business online rather than having to go or walk over to the public records, retrieve the warrant, then go back up. During the IRC trial period, they indicated that this was a really big part of the process that was inconvenient for them. And so that was something that we were going to work on as well. The Geiger kitchen replacement is actually, the Geiger kitchen is in very bad repair. And we have Ken evaluating both what it would cost to do the remodel for it to make it last. And then also along with that, what is a temporary solution? Some of the other things, perhaps a trailer, some of the, prisons prepare pre-prepared food. What does that model look like? So Ken is evaluating those as well. Part of the law justice team, MacArthur Foundation goes away at the end of the year. I need to capture all the data that they've used from us and get it in a meaningful fashion, which is going to take some time for us to do, and then update the dashboard that goes along with it. So he, Aaron Lind, and Diane are going to work to try to make that transition. And then Docfinity, one of the things that we want to do, and this began about a year ago as well, is we're experiencing, papers getting missed or people getting released without, having their information in front of them, those type of things, so errors at the jail. And so I wanted to get to a paperless one that gives us one more advantage of retrieving the information in a more rapid fashion, and then two, having some ability for us to work with the clerk's office and everyone else to get the necessary paperwork we need for releases. So those are kind of just some of them. There's, the other part of this, and have you got the next slide with all the projects on it?
Before you go to the next slide, can I
Yes,
ask
sir.
a question? On the law and justice data team, I think you and I have talked previously about the fact that when we transitioned, the data that we were using to monitor the status of the jail and Geiger and everything else was incomplete at best. Is that still the case, or
Yeah,
talk a
so
little bit about that?
I think it was kind of piecemealed. I think Commissioner French, if you want, there's a bunch of different, ISG was looking at a portion of it, but it was only from one lens. We also produced a report out of Aaron Lind that is a little more comprehensive. Diane's efforts were mainly centered on the projects that were at hand and focusing on the outcomes of those. And we want to bring all those together into one meaningful fashion so that we can move forward with the data, and along with that too, Commissioner French, is our ability to show the public an outward facing model that the public can look and stakeholders can look at on a continued basis. So
Okay.
does that address it?
So you feel you're comfortable getting to that end goal then?
I am,
Good. Okay.
if I have the personnel to do it, and if not,
Okay.
then it will be one more of my projects that I have to take on to try to manage. So.
Okay. Thank you.
The next one, oops, that's not the one I was thinking of. The other side of this would be is how aggressive we want to get on the blueprint of reform and all the projects that are listed in there. There's probably 25 projects in the blueprint of reform, and it's going to take a significant amount of time to work through those. We'll probably prioritize the ones that are most meaningful. There's there's some for the courts, there's some for detention services, some for the clerks, some for the public defenders, some for pretrial services. So there's got to be some prioritization on that so that we can move through some of those projects if we're going to make progress. So like I said, there's like 25 or so projects that are listed in the blueprint form. And where do we start? So, and this is not a pitch to have a designated, project manager, but the work's there. It just depends on how aggressive we want to get on some of these things, so.
That's the way we've structured it, is this person is going to be housed in the project management department, but be dedicated to Mike's projects as much as possible. If there's any free capacity, they'll be able to work on enterprise-wide projects if there's availability. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
And this slide may have got a little creative. I did some Googling. I didn't find revenue facilitation anywhere, but it felt right to put that on here. So there's two projects. When we talked with Scott initially launching this, the idea was to try to self-fund, so try to offset our cost through getting dollar amounts back to cover. And so we have two projects that I like to highlight where we are actively facilitating revenue coming in, especially in the first one, that's more of a facilitation role. The second one is us actually driving it. But the sale and relocation of the 8th Avenue building, without the project management there to bridge the gap and make sure that things didn't go completely haywire, I don't think that it would have happened as smoothly, or quite honestly happened really at all, if we didn't get involved and make sure that all the players in there were following a certain protocol, I guess. And so the total dollar amount in that, I would say, is around $4 million that we helped facilitate. Again, we weren't. It's not like we were creating that, but we helped push it through. The second one is the project that we talked to you guys about a couple weeks ago, historical claims. So we are actually driving that project to see if there's any unclaimed funds out there that we could bring back to the county to put into the general fund. So again, I put very rough, underlined it, bolded it. That's just 2 to 4 million is kind of the average of the data that we've gotten for Washington entities. So to clarify again, our ask is for 1 business analyst, 1 project manager, with a total dollar amount of, I believe, $300,000 to the penny. Full benefit load for both of those. That is it for my presentation. Questions, concerns, feedback?
So I've got some questions. IT used to be the holder of the project managers, and then a couple of years ago it moved over to you guys, correct?
Yeah, but 10 months ago, yeah.
Okay. So how is that transition going?
It's good. So we're developing standards, templates. I think you guys saw our business case template. So I could bore you guys with a lot of detail, but in the end, you guys will get standardized documents when we're coming to meet with you. Is the big thing.
And how many project managers do you have right now? I apologize because I didn't.
The same as we started with, 2.
And it's Ken, and I don't know that I know.
Frank Cervantes is the second one. He started in May.
Okay. I don't believe I've met him yet, so. So I guess it's just like, as we start to look at the ERP or system, where things should be housed and where they shouldn't be, and all of those. And so it seems like you're trying to centralize that more with purchasing, like with facilities, as we go and look at the clean energy standards and what that's going to mean, because that's really a facilities issue. I see purchasing as kind of, what is then the purchaser requirements and all of that, surrounding it. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, how much of that is project management, because really facilities has to be managing that project. Having somebody who doesn't know facilities is, I don't see as beneficial as really having facilities be the one understanding it and managing it. And some of these things, I just want to make sure that the departments should be doing some of that themselves versus just the project manager. I think a lot of times what I saw is it was easy to say, oh, we've got a project manager, so we're going to push that off to the project manager, when the department really needs to be the one who's requesting it, because they know all the day-to-day stuff. And I know as we do, charters, for these different projects, it's like everyone's supposed to be involved. But so I just wonder how much we're pushing off to a project manager versus really the department should be doing.
Yeah.
So I'll take a little bit of that, because my team and Tony and I have been working very closely lately. And so I will say, when I first started in IT, housed the project managers, I would say there wasn't much structure. Ken tried his best to have departments create charters, but he led a lot of those initiatives, and then the prior PMs before him. Since we've shifted to the purchasing and project management office, so that's the first shift, is it truly is a different department, so to speak, now. So since we've moved the PMs into Tony's department, he has really put some structure and design around what is the role of the PM and what is the role of the department. And so even through the new dashboard that they just launched, we as departments have to go in, we have to ask for, define the project, we have to provide which of our people, to your point, are actually the ones that are doing the work. And the PM, the new model is that they truly are a PM. They're there to help manage the process and kind of keep us in line, so to speak, right? Make sure that we're hitting our deliverables, helping us understand what milestones we might need to be looking at. But the model is really starting to switch back to, okay, as the department, who are my people I have on this? I had to define who is my lead on this. It's no longer, I'm gonna have Frank come do it all for me. And so I think that model is shifting, but we do still need a PM, someone who specializes in making sure that we start to finish projects to ensure that we finish checking the box and that we roll out a complete project. Some of the other stuff I noticed when I came in, for example, we were one of the first groups to go paperless with our employee files. And Ken had so much on his plate and it kind of all got handed to him that it almost hit a middle ground and stopped. And nobody was following up and nobody was checking and nobody was helping us figure out, did it get closed or did it not? Were things working? Where were they not working? And then how do we get back in contact with the Docfinity rep to finish the process? And so now with the ownership kind of switching and the PM is there to help us check the boxes, but we still have to finish the project. I think we're gonna see more of that model where the departments truly do have skin in the game and we don't just pitch something over the fence at a project manager and say, do it all for us.
Well, and that's a good example of, I mean, before I became commissioner, that trying to go paperless. So before your time, that the county was trying to go paperless. We spent a ton of time on training people. We were training departments. We were doing all of that. And to see that it's still an issue is actually concerning to me as a commissioner because, when we talk about, these efficiencies that we're going to have, I'm not seeing that long-term effect of them. I mean, I guess that's the problem I'm having, and even from a budget perspective, we keep talking about, if we're going to have a new system, then what's that long-term effect? And at some point, especially with where we're at on salaries, and this isn't just here, this is, I'm talking about it at home with my husband, we aren't going to be able to sustain these salary increases forever. And so at some point, these efficiencies have to be driving the employee needs, and we haven't seen that. And so this is just an example for me to look at going, okay, so back in 2015, when I became an employee at Spokane County, we were going down this process and spent a lot of money then and a lot of training time and a lot of work and effort, with everyone. And if we haven't made any progress in it, then that's an issue for me as a commissioner now to say, we keep hearing of these, big systems, and that's where I guess my concern is going to be with ERP, is if we're going to spend, up to $8 million on a system, and people are going to say, no, we don't want to do it. We want to keep it status quo. I'm just concerned. So
I think you raised some really good points, Commissioner Cutie. We've done a pretty good job with project management throughout the county, but I think where we've been lacking is managing through to the deliverable and measuring what those outcomes are and being able to demonstrate what we believed we were going to receive on the front end to what we received on the back end. And that's been a missing point. That's where Tony and team have been focusing on the upfront, create the charter that identifies what the benefits to the county, to the finances are going to be, make sure there is buy-in by the departments who are asking for this, and they're basically signing, they agree that these are the efficiencies that will be gained in this, and then measuring on the backside and holding the teams accountable to that. So the chartering process and the commitment by the departments and the measuring on the back end is going to avoid a lot of those things that we didn't see because we had a technology that got implemented and we never followed through what we felt and what we believed the efficiencies were going to receive. So ERP is a great example, defining on the front end how all those interactions are going to work, what the benefits are for whether it's HR, whether it's payroll, whether it's finance, whatever department it happens to be, being able to basically signing up to what you believe that efficiency gains are going to be, developing the business cases as if we're going to invest $5-8 million in ERP, here's what we believe the return will be long term, and measure those things to make sure that we're actually receiving those.
when I think even on projects, that we're chartering, I don't think we're going back and looking at the budget to see if there's been any change or efficiencies after that, after you sign off that the project's done. And I think that's a piece that's missing for me.
Yep.
To be able to commit to the future.
That's what this is. That's what this team is now doing, is they're building those into the front end and measuring those on the back end to ensure that we can demonstrate and then reporting back.
Right.
Okay, this is what was committed. Did we see those things?
So just like on the screen showing the 2022 projects, it should be, so where did 2021 projects end up and what efficiencies do we gain from those projects? Because we all keep looking at these projects like, oh, and I keep hearing it, we're gonna gain all these efficiencies, this is gonna, be more cost effective for us, but I'm not seeing any of that.
Right.
And that's gonna come. So I started the department in January 1st. I'm capturing as much data as I can as of then. Before that point, it's very hard to get good data. So we gotta start somewhere, and that's what's up.
No, I agree,
That's fully
I'm
the
just
plan.
letting you know my, kind of my
Absolutely.
thoughts and comments as we look at this, because we gotta look at it, if we're gonna look at it centrally, which is what this is doing, then those are the things that I need to know. And, and something like the 8th Avenue building, those things don't happen very often, so those are just, kind of unique one-offs. But, and there's always gonna be, one of those a year, or two, kind of thing, but that's part of what should be figured out in the job. So anyway, Commissioner French, you wanted to comment?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, we've initiated a number of efforts to achieve efficiency, and in that universe, we never see a report back that says we saved X number of dollars. And as I think about this, part of the reason is that as we achieve efficiencies, and I think there's some of these programs we have achieved efficiencies, we fill in that capacity with other projects. And so we then start to expand the universe of things we're doing, as opposed to saying, we're going to do this, when we're done with this, we're done, period. Stick a fork in it, we're done. We don't do that. We don't close out a project and say, here's what we've achieved. So I don't know how you overcome that. I mean, I just, as you get capacity, you fill it with other projects and stuff. And, we want people to keep working and make the county better, but there's no way to benchmark your successes and stuff. So to offer that as an observation, I don't know what the solution is, but, I've seen that over the years that, all of a sudden you got capacity and you fill it.
One thing I was gonna add too, prior to having project managers, there would be a lot of silos that would apply for grants. They would get their grants, having not met with all the stakeholders, and then when they go back, and a lot of you have been privy to this too, go back and find out that the stakeholder can't do it at all, and we had to make changes like that. So the PM brings in that unique perspective of closing all the gaps, I think. And Ken Moore was the only project manager for the period there. That's why he inherited all of these projects, from IT. But I definitely think that having a project manager, designated business case, charter like you're talking about, buy-in from all of the departments all the way down to the worker bee, then coming back up, drawing out the perspectives from the workers. I mean, those are things that the skill sets that the project managers have that, quite honestly, department heads don't have time to do. You know what I mean? They have that ability to pull that out. So I'm a big supporter of project management. I think it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Well, and I'll just say, so when John Dixon, he started before I did, but, through his time, he actually was having project manager training classes for employees.
Yeah.
So that way departments could establish that within their own office, and not have it be, because we've used, from my perspective, Ken's been for those really big projects. That's when we brought Ken and Arian in,
Yeah.
kind of for those really big projects. And then John was doing the training amongst departments, so the departments could have a project manager kind of type within their department to kind of do those things. So that way it wasn't taking up, Ken or Arian's time. It was getting, within the departments, those project managers. And so that way it was not a burden on the rest of the system and costing more and hiring another employees. So it's just, there's just different things. So I'm gonna have to, obviously I have to be thinking about this, but those are just the things I'm thinking about, that, how do we do it so that we're empowering departments to do it, not in a silo, but, but in a means like that. And we haven't had part of it, we kind of started doing a lot more with the later build retreats, and having those discussions and talking about it. So I think we're getting back to those.
Yeah, I do think though, and I've worked in a lot of industries and many of them private sector. typically your SMEs, your subject matter experts, aren't your project managers. And that was kind of the John Dixon model, was let's throw everything at the wall, see who we can train, figure out who maybe has a little capacity. And I actually think that's part of why we are so far behind, honestly. My department, for example, Linda Fields is the one HR analyst that we essentially have for systems, and she's my only systems person, and she was also supposed to be our project manager. She doesn't have the capacity. And I think a lot of us are kind of in that place where a project manager really is someone who's that oversight, who's collaborating with the different departments, who's working with the vendors, who's making sure that they're tracking our deliverables, our finances on the back end, are we meeting expectations? And I really think a lot of the projects, even the SCAM project you described, when you leave it sitting with just a department, other work happens, right? Life happens. And so I don't think any of our projects really come through full fruition a lot of the time when we leave them without a PM, because you don't have someone bird dogging it and closing it out. And so from a department level, like we all have a ton of projects that would create efficiencies that we know would pull overtime down, that new for HR employees are asking for, candidates are asking for these things. But without someone who is specialized in project management, for example, even knowing how to use a tool and what a milestone is, like Workday or Monday, there's different tools that we could be using. The departments aren't going to know that. They're just a couple of days in a class are not going to give them true PM skills. And so I think if, as a department that is really far behind, and I'll admit it, HR is so far behind the times right now with our systems and solutions. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm not saying that. I mean, I understand the need, but we also have limited capacity as well. And so it's just trying to, I think I'm asking to find a little bit of balance, because it is partly on the departments that they do have to, I mean, the whole, you know, going electronic and paperless, I mean, that, it can be a countywide project, but that project manager, if it's a countywide project, is not gonna bird dog every department. You've gotta have the department head helping, you know, be that person to make it happen, you know, because, you know, across 50 departments, one project manager, that would be more than full-time for them. So I'm just, I guess I'm just trying to understand what the real perspective is, what the real, you know, thought is, and how do we help empower the departments though, and get the departments, because they have, you know, staff that can do it. And I know everyone's, you know, working hard, but we've, you know, but these are things that, you know, we can't hire someone to contract in for, you know, otherwise we'd be hiring a contractor to come into every department and say, we're going to scan your documents for you. And in some ways, if that's a better way to do it, then that's a better way to do it. But I guess I'm just not sure where we're.
So your 2 points of emphasis are exactly mine when this started. So the first one, how do we empower sponsors, departments to actually lead their projects with project management, setting the milestones, setting the structure, timelines, everything like that. So without that, and how it happened in the past with departments, while well-intentioned, they didn't know how to manage projects. They didn't know after a project closes, that doesn't really mean it's closed. You still have a task of reporting out in 12 months, 24 months to make sure that we capture that data. So the second part is the structure that we're creating. So not just theoretical trainings on what project management is, what we're creating is templates, is step by step. Here's every step, every document that you need for those steps to successfully complete a project. So we have that done. We just need the time to go deploy that in departments.
One of the nice things about what Tony's doing and the formation of this project management group does is it's similar to all of the departments that want their own IT staff in person. And then it decentralizes IT and it creates a cost structure that's probably unsupportable. By focusing and making some core responsibilities in one place, then we have core reporting back to the board too. So Tony could give frequent updates on all of these projects and how we're making progress or not making progress. So it's a central focus a point for the board for reporting purposes. And I see that as soon as the metrics are developed and then what is the expectation following good feedback information for the board. So I think what Tony's group is doing is going to be invaluable in the future to the board.
We can discuss more about frequency that you guys want to see these reports. Don't want to overwhelm you, but that's definitely on the horizon.
I think a common shortcoming of many organizations, we're not unique there, is the identification of the savings and then following through to pinpoint where those were occurring. It's not difficult to identify them, and that's what the charter is. This isn't a charter being created by Tony's team. It's a charter that the initial business case is being developed by the department, seeing I have an opportunity, but it needs multiple department interaction. It needs multiple department buy-in. But here's the benefit that I see. And then his team takes that and converts it into, if there's justification for it, converts it into a charter that gives clarity around everyone, all the stakeholders who are involved with this, and pinpoints. So let's use an example. I think from this, I will be able to reduce these 2 positions in my department in this year. Well, on the back end, guess what we haven't done, and what this will allow us to do is going back to the budget, and when we implement this project, point at the budget to say, here's where those 2 positions now went away. So we're able to demonstrate what the savings were on it. And that's a piece that we haven't done well. And it's, again, we're not unique there. If you don't have that framework and that strong overview of that enterprise look at it, you're going to miss the back end piece of being able to measure the results.
And I guess, I don't want to create where departments don't want to make efficiencies, in fear of losing people. I mean, that's the other flip side of it all. So, I mean, it's just something that I'm just concerned as we do, because we talk about it from that perspective, but then, what are those efficiencies, and how do we show that? Because sometimes it's an M&O, it's supposed to be efficient, so they're not having to hire more people. Those kind of things too, so.
Yep. And where we're at right now, where we have, I think, 12%, not 15% vacancies around the county, and we don't seem to be changing that trajectory. This isn't about individuals losing a job. This is about us being able to support technology and other investments to help us in this challenging recruiting time, to be able to even get positions in, that we don't have to rely on those positions in the vacancy reports that we have today. So that's another benefit of it as well.
Big picture, this is one of the most effective vehicles that we have for enterprise change, for process change. Without it, we're back into silos. And for example, we have, I think, 9 different payment processors. So stuff like that, that's not even on our project list that we know we have to get to. Those can't be done without this bridge.
Any other comments? Anything else?
That's it.
Okay.
It's
Thank
everything
you.
project management.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you, guys.
And that means we're ahead of schedule, and the sheriff is already here.
As long as John does it.
He's already got one printed out. John, that's fast.
I can sit wherever. Sit over in the corner. Good to see you.
More binders.
Little thicker than some other departments.
I
The
heard,
sheriff's is in there as well.
I had heard you guys were asking a pretty explicit question, so I want to make sure I had the detail with me.
Oh, come on, I don't ask questions.
And,
Well, welcome, and we will let you guys present on your supplemental budget.
To open up, I'm just gonna start with the cautionary note of any thought that there's gonna be 30 empty positions for the sheriff's office going into 23. There won't be. Right now, we are approaching only 9 positions left of the positions that you gave us for 22. This has been one of the best recruiting year we have ever had. If the trend continues, we should be hiring into the pool positions by the end of the year, which means in roughly the last 20 months, we have hired nearly 80 people. So we have been very aggressive, and we have The other caution is, whatever we have remaining in our 22 budget, the board needs to remember that we have obligations in the 23 budget of the second half of the signing bonuses. So we've always thought of that monies that we have due to the vacancies being carried forward to pay the bill down so that we don't attack the general fund going into 23 to pay for the signing bonuses.
And that should be accounted for as a payable in the 22 budget, that is an obligation that is due in 23. So it should be set up in accounting wise that it doesn't affect your 23 budget. It should be already in the 22.
The way if I remember, the budget office set it up was half the bonuses would be paid in 22, the other half would be paid in 23.
Right, but you still obligate it in 22 because you know it's a liability that you owe in the future. So.
And one other piece for the sheriff's 2022 budget is with the contract settlement, we are looking at needing to do a budget amendment to manage the kind of increases for that contract. So that will be coming to you all later this year.
So then we want to ensure that those
ensure that that's
sign-on
included
bonuses
in the
are
calculation.
included in that.
So those are my opening cautions. There won't be any positions that will be empty if we are continue on this current trend. We're projecting 6 retirements for 23. And again, with the current recruiting, we will be into the pool positions hopefully by February of this year. So we shouldn't see that slinky effect too much going forward until we, in June, when the signing bonuses go away, then we'll have to see how the recruiting goes for the next 6 months and see if it slows down significantly.
And hopefully if you've filled up all the positions and you have a low number of retirements, then we should be in a good position. So all those incentives and all the stuff you did, great job.
So I'll let Todd go into the meat of the presentation and we'll answer questions after.
Perfect. We have a lot of information to cover, so I will try to get through it as fast as we can.
And I will just let you know, I mean, we just have a hard stop at 9:50.
Right.
Well, mine just got changed to 9:40, but I know where these guys work at, so
Okay.
I might just quietly walk out, but
Okay.
I'm pretty comfortable.
And I do know that we will get to kind of the heart of our request for supplementals, which is phase 2 of our strategic plan. It really involves our investigative unit. So John Knowles, the undersheriff in charge of our investigative and intelligence unit, is really best equipped to be able to respond to some of the details when we get to that section. So with that, what I'd like to do is go ahead and jump into kind of the PowerPoint presentation, which is kind of an overview with regard to the budget. And the way I looked at this was really there are 3 budgets in play here. There is the 2022 adopted budget. There is the 2023 preliminary budget, which is really the carry forward of 22, as if we were going to do all the same things. And then we have the third budget, which would be, with our supplemental request. So as we approached it and tried to kind of review everything that was in play, the one thing I did want to look at was there were a number of things that were not included in the 2022 adopted budget that then become drivers for the 2023 preliminary budget. And some of the 3 largest drivers that are moving those numbers, because I thought of this as if I was sitting in your shoes, sitting in your seat, and was looking at the bottom line budgets and compared 2022 adopted to where we want to go in 2023, it looks like a big number. And so trying to get past the shock factor and the sticker shock, I wanted to point out these 3 drivers that were not in the 2022 adopted budget. First and foremost is we did not have labor contracts settled by the time we adopted the 2022 budget. There were impacts for both 2022 and impacts for 2023. These were the numbers generated by Josh Grote when we were negotiating those contracts as far as fiscal impacts for each year. And so you will see that the impact from the labor contracts that will show up in this budget would be in the area of $3.6 million. Additionally, you guys approved our ability to respond to calls for assistance. This was our phase 1 of our strategic plan. It really included 2 major crimes detectives and 19 patrol deputies for that ability to respond. We were going to phase the funding of those in throughout calendar year 2022, recognizing that we had a big hill to climb in filling vacancies. And so we have been working with the budget office, but just to recognize the financial impact that you will see as a result of that approach, and the majority of that cost not being included in the adopted budget is about an impact of $2 million. And then the third thing were vehicles. We have a large fleet. We try to replace about 20% of that on an annual basis, assuming a 5-year lifespan. That typically is in about that area. We initially were waiting for some other financial issues to be resolved. So funding for that item was held back and then added after the 22 budget was adopted. And so those are 3 preliminary budget drivers, or drivers for the preliminary budget that roll towards that impact. If you go to the next slide, please. As the sheriff mentioned, we want to make sure that we're good stewards of money on behalf of the county. We want to make sure that we're trying to keep apprised of as many developments as possible. One of the things that the board was presented in the budget roll-up for 2023 was an assumption for vacancies, that we would maintain approximately 30 vacancies through 2023, valued at approximately $3.2 million. As the sheriff mentioned, we have been extremely successful in our recruiting efforts. We've been very diligent about it. And so we believe that we are honing in on about 9 vacancies, what I call above the line in our positions, plus the 10 in pool. And I believe that those 9 will evaporate as we approach the beginning of the year. That if they're not on board, that we will probably be really close to having those committed. So I believe that right after the first of the year, we will be simply trying to recruit for those pool positions. And then the other one is we have a couple of cost escalations on critical functions. And this is just really trying to make sure that we reflect reality. If you will switch to the next slide, please. There are 2 specific items, and one is fuel. The 2022 budget was based on an assumption of $3.44 a gallon for fuel. As you know, at the peak of July in this summer, gas was as high as $4.86 in the Spokane market, and that's based on the receipts for when we were purchasing fuel. That was the price we were purchasing fuel on our fuel cards. It has come down, but as of last week, the statewide average for Washington was $4.39. We ran the numbers assuming $4 a gallon across the board for fiscal year 2023. And at that rate, it appears that we will have about $175,000 shortfall for our fuel costs. And that is assuming roughly the same mileage for the vehicles that we currently have in our fleet, and then recognizing that we are including those additional positions brought on this year as we phase them in and assume that they will have an average fuel usage per vehicle as well. The other one was Criminal Justice Training Commission, the registration fees for lateral officers. And this was, I guess, related to the reforms adopted by the legislature, but part of it was really taking a look at what type of training out-of-state lateral officers were receiving prior to coming to work in Washington State. They wanted a more in-depth assessment of that education, that training. And so they enrolled the cost of that additional assessment into the cost of, I don't know whether you want to call it the tuition cost, the registration cost, or the certification cost, but essentially a lateral officer comes to Washington State, they go through an equivalency program, and then they're granted peace officer certification in Washington State. To enroll in that equivalency program, we believe will have a financial impact of an additional $40,000 per year on being able to get our officers certified in Washington State.
There is a caveat on the training. The Washington State Training Commission has approached us and asked us to help rewrite their basic law enforcement academy curriculum. Because that curriculum is currently legally indefensible. This is something that we've been trying to get the state to do. They have finally have come to us. They've asked us to help us rewrite it. There may be about $100,000 worth of incidental cost in there, but commissioners, this is much cheaper than $1 million that we paid in a settlement, because I couldn't get on a stand and testify to the fact that the training in the state of Washington is legally indefensible. So we're trying to keep that as low as possible. I'm just giving you a heads up that because the training is so critical, there may be a slight increase in training just to get the curricula to where we can have it legally defensible.
Okay. Next slide, please. So then we move from the 2023 preliminary budget into the supplemental requests. There are 3 categories in our supplemental requests. The first category is one that I think deserves a little extra attention because the county is already, I guess you would say, committed itself through its contract with the Air Force, and that is for the small arms range. But again, the drivers of our supplemental requests really are in these 3 categories. It's the cost associated with bringing the SAR Small Arms Range and Training Center online. It is our phase 2 of our strategic plan, that implementation, and then it's other requests that are also essential for our agency, but that fall outside that strategic plan. Next slide, please. So with the SAR costs, and this again is consistent with the contract that we have with the Air Force. That contract calls for the creation of 2 FTEs, and this is in the financial model that was presented during those contract developments. It is also part of the financials that were in the adopted project scope that the board did early in this year. Those 2 positions include a facility manager as well as a chief building maintenance specialist. The way these positions work is you'll remember that if you think it's one building, one roof, but essentially 2 halves of the building. Small arms range is 1 half, the training center is the 2nd half. Small arms range, the Air Force, what we negotiated is that the Air Force would pay for 80% of the operating costs associated with the small arms center. And so for the 2 FTE positions, half the position is assigned to the SAR, half of it's assigned to the training center. So with regard to the SAR, the Air Force is going to pay 80% of the operating costs, including the costs associated with these 2 FTEs. So essentially, when we take a look at this cost, the Air Force is paying for 40% of the cost of these positions. And we did calculate fully loaded. There's a little bit of a formula change with regard to the financial spreadsheet we did with the Air Force, and then the budget request forms auto-populate the benefit costs. So there's a little bit of difference there, but it's relatively close. So these are the 2 positions, again, that were provided for within the contract with the Air Force.
Okay, so I guess I'm confused because it says if the cost is split 50-50, then you say the Air Force is paying 70%, and then down below it says 0.7 FTE and the remaining 0.3 FTE. So
Good question.
can you
bet.
explain that to me?
So it's multiple layers here. So the first thing is so for the facility manager position, 50% of that position is dedicated to the training side of the facility and 50% to the SAR. For the SAR side, the Air Force is paying 80% of that cost, okay? So, so that's how we're splitting up kind of the revenue stream, the finances behind the facility manager.
Okay.
This paragraph that you're referencing is how would we fill this position? Tony Anderman is our director of training. In that position, he currently oversees our training center at the state line. And a lot of the activities that he performs are very similar to what this facility manager position would do. And so our proposal is that as we bring this facility online and phase out the state line facility, that about 7/10 of his time would be spent performing this role and therefore supported by the funding of this role. The remaining 30% of his time would be carrying on the other functions that he performs as the director of training, and that would be funded by the general fund.
So,
Which is a shared
so,
position
but
within the general fund.
as this comes online, I mean, how much of an overlap is there?
Um,
I mean, because I'm
Right.
just assuming that his position is coming from there here. We're
Correct.
not, so, I mean, this makes it seem like we're adding a new position, and I don't think that's what we're doing,
Is it
right?
just a reorg essentially? Like, we're not adding a new headcount. Tony's position stays Tony's position.
Correct.
It's just funded differently.
It is funded differently, and it's very similar to when we have a grant-funded position where maybe the grant pays for
Okay.
less than 100%.
Okay, I guess that's what I'm just trying to
Yes,
figure out, because it's not really a full out of this cost, because he's already in the budget.
right, there's still a
It's-
percentage
it's a
of this cost.
Reallocation of that cost.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct,
I think I have that.
yes, yes.
Okay.
But Ashley is correct.
So it's not an added headcount.
Tony's position, it's not an added headcount. And in the discussions that we had with the Air Force, they said, look, we don't want you just to take a position that you currently have. We want to create this position. It's like, okay, we can create this position and kind of back off the other. Because they said, if you want to plug somebody in to perform this function, even if it's less than half time, that's okay with us. We just want to track it through this title. Okay, so it's like tracking a grant position.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good question. Next slide, please.
Sorry, one more. So the chief building maintenance specialist though, is that a new headcount? So you're
Yes.
on that side, you're asking for one additional headcount,
Yes.
but you don't have an out at the state line right now.
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure I had my brain
And
wrapped
are you
around
gonna be
that.
doing the same percentages where it's a 50-50 and then 80%
Correct.
goes to the Air Force?
Correct. Yep. So the next slide, and this is why I handed out copies, because I don't think most of us can read. Maybe Mike Barber can because of his proximity to the screen. But this is not intended for you to be able to read the print on the screen. It's just, this is the table that was created in our negotiations with the Air Force for operating costs. These costs were based upon a real-life facility that's the same size elsewhere in the United States. So yes, we do have to accommodate for the climate difference between where it's located and we are. But these were the costs. These were what we used as a baseline for estimated operating costs for this facility. The one thing this chart does show you is, as you look at the columns to the two columns to the far right on this chart, you will see the 21 lane range, which is the SAR training facility. And so as it states in the slide, of the column that's labeled 21 lane range, the Air Force is paying 80% of all of those costs. And so you will see the facility manager, chief building maintenance specialist up at the top under personnel, and then you'll see the remainder of the operating costs under that column, again, that the Air Force will be paying 80% of that cost. This is done as a base year 2020. Every year there's an escalator of 3%. And so since the Air Force doesn't start paying until 2023, the federal fiscal year, there's already been a 3% escalator for 21, 22, and 23 built into these numbers. So,
Okay, and these numbers are really to be showing what the Air Force is gonna be paying.
right,
Because when we talked about the small arms range, you stated that your operating costs were gonna be
correct,
within your.
correct. So this is exactly the same information that was presented to you last fall and again earlier this spring.
Okay.
It just shows that we now need to make sure we include it in our budget. And so again, because we're contractually obligated to kind of adopt these numbers, while it is technically a supplemental budget request, it's one that I would say that we're already obligated, that we've already obligated the county to.
Right, and we have the revenue to offset it because it'll be coming in.
In large part, yes. Yes.
And sorry, just HR question, but where did you get the salary for the chief building maintenance specialist? Did you work with HR for them to give you that salary, or where'd you pull that from? Because that's way higher than
So
many
that's
positions.
fully loaded.
Okay.
So that's fully loaded. We went off, I believe, working with facilities and taking a look at their job descriptions and titles. And so we found, working with Gil, what we thought would be the equivalent title, and then just took their salary off the compensation table.
Got it. So that has like a 50% benefit add on it, then that's why that's.
I don't think it's quite 50%. I think the footnotes that I have in that model is assumed like $1,500 a month for healthcare, and then it was another percentage on top of that for quote unquote other benefits. So I think it comes out to just slightly less, 44 something percent, something like that. Okay. And then next slide, please. This is the last element of the SAR project. Within the project scope that was adopted, it includes a number of capital items that were going to be included in the facility. This one is a virtual firearms training system. In the adopted project scope, we assumed $314,000 plus for the system. That was an outright purchase. Since that time, we have taken a look at evaluating the outright purchase versus subscribing to the cloud-based system from the same vendor. And what we realized is if you do an outright purchase, you then have to pay for an update on an annual basis of approximately $25,000 per year. If you don't do that update, the system is basically considered obsolete after about 6 years. If you subscribe to the cloud-based system, the updates are automatically included. And so at the end of the same 5 or 6 year period, you have a system that has been totally updated and continue to move forward and not be considered obsolete. So what we anticipate here is simply taking the cost that was included in the project overview and dividing it by the annual cost. At that rate, it looks like that cost that's incorporated in the project overview will land us between 4 to 5 years of subscription. Okay. So those are the SAR costs. Next in our drivers for supplemental budget is our strategic plan. And this is phase 2 of our strategic plan. If you go to the next slide. So phase 2 of our strategic plan, you'll recall phase 1 was really about our ability to respond to calls for help. Phase 2 is really about our ability then to go to the next step. And the next step is being able to, once the site is secured, is to be able to go collect evidence, do the necessary investigation to be able to present that case to the prosecutor's office so they can bring charges. They can hold offenders accountable for actions and ultimately bring justice to the victims of those crimes. So that really is the focus of this phase 2, is our, like I said, our ability to go to that next step in law enforcement. I also added the training division because it seems like we're never done with the training division, because every time we turn around, there's more legislative reforms, more mandates that do impact our ability to run the agency. So with that, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, our strategic planning process really is broken into the investigate column as well as the training column. The investigate column includes 9 requests, and built into these 9 requests is more detail. And for these requests, what I'd like to do is have you refer to the binder that I handed out. Midway through that binder, you'll see a number of tabs that are numbered, 1 through 13. And so the next part of our presentation will be to go through these tabs. John, chime in whenever you want. So under tab 1, this is really a bit of a reorganization. And this is really trying to align the proper workload with the proper people. And so, I want to go back up one. Thank you. And so as part of this reorganization, we currently have a lieutenant that, as we say, works our front desk, oversees courtroom security, oversees our card system for security purposes, and a number of other things. We believe this work is probably more appropriately assigned to a sergeant rather than a lieutenant. But at the same time, we are in desperate need of a lieutenant in the investigative unit. And so if you turn to behind tab 1, the first sheet is the summary, which is the financial impact. And that's, like I say, the request form. But if you turn to the second page after that, it gives you the business justification for this. And this one is a little bit more complex because we're going back and forth between county-only positions and shared positions under our cost structure. through LECAP. And so essentially what we're talking about on the county-only side, we're talking about removing a lieutenant and replacing it with a sergeant. So there is a cost savings on that portion of this reorganization to the county. But then we're talking about creating a new lieutenant position in the investigative unit. And that lieutenant position has traditionally, in the investigative unit, has been a shared position, which is shared between the county general fund and contract, Spokane Valley. So then if you look down about 3/4 down the page, you will see the net cost implications for this FTE reorganization. Again, this is probably the most complex as far as moving pieces of this request.
Yeah, I would also add that traditionally, we did have 3 lieutenants between the investigative and intelligence divisions because of some needs in other areas of the organization and not having the FTEs to cover it. That position has been shifted between training, the front desk, and now it's come to the point where we have, now that we've filled our vacant positions, our units are fully staffed. We literally have only 1 vacant position in the investigative division right now. We need an extra middle manager to take over some of the responsibilities that I had taken on as the undersheriff that I just carried with me to allow us to survive with only 2 lieutenants in the investigative division. And it's become fairly untenable to do that. So we do need the 3rd lieutenant. We have had it in the past. We're just kind of getting it realigned with past practice now.
And a little institutional knowledge. During the Great Recession, the way that we reduced the personnel in the sheriff's office was we cut command first, then we looked at our mid-level managers. We had 11 lieutenants at the time. We cut that down to 8. We're getting back to the realization that we do really need to get one of those lieutenant positions back.
Okay. If we now move to tab 2 in your books. So this is really about property crimes, and we have 2 units that work closely together. We have the Spokane County Investigative Unit, SCIU, and then we have the Spokane Valley Investigative Unit, SVIU. Both of those units are assigned to property crimes. And like I say, this number, we used to have, back some time ago, in the unincorporated area, the equivalent of about 1 property crime detective per district. We have 10 districts. And so
before the Great Recession, we had 18 property crimes detectives assigned to the unincorporated area. 18. We're currently at 8.
7.
7.
So what this does, and again, tab 2, the second page behind tab 2 is the business justification.
And I will also add that currently the Spokane Valley, which also has a separate property crimes unit, is currently staffed at 10 detectives and 1 deputy. So they have 4 more dedicated FTEs right now investigating property crimes.
And again, I just want to keep reminding people that in this phase of our strategic planning, again, our ability is to bring justice to victims, hold people accountable. And this is really about trying to gather all the evidence to be able to pass it on to the prosecutor's office to be able to go forward.
One of the drivers for our need for additional bodies is this. The way we assign cases in Spokane County, and I know I've spoken to most of you about this, is we don't have the capacity to assign every single case that comes in to Spokane County through Crime Check. The way we triage cases, that we try to assign cases that have some reasonable amount of follow-up to be done, some solvability. There is some piece of information that if given to a detective, they can follow that case up. Our staffing levels are such now that between ourselves and the Valley, we miss out on about 1,500 cases a year that have some solvability that if we had an available detective, we could investigate. And believe it or not, our property crime sergeants, they get a lot of phone calls. And I've been that sergeant. I was that sergeant for 3 years out in the Valley where I got daily phone calls from people wanting to know why we were not investigating their case, because they're smart, they know there's solvability there. And it's very frustrating to have to tell a citizen, yes, I know your vehicle was prowled, I know somebody pawned your stolen item, I can get you the item back, but I can't investigate the person who did it because we're too busy investigating somebody who lost more than you, and I don't have the capacity to do it. That's a hard sell. The citizens expect more out of us. And the addition of these bodies is solely to attack that gap of solvable crimes that we can't get to.
And I can tell you that when they're done with the sergeant, they usually are on the phone. So,
And I can say from a construction industry standpoint, I think they've given up even calling.
Correct.
Because it happens every night on every job. I mean, literally just had, wires from a crane stolen up in Hilliard. Just, and they know to take out the cameras. I mean, it just doesn't matter, so. And so I think
we are missing entire units from where we had established in 2008. Multiple units that focus just on property crimes and drug crimes that don't exist anymore. So this is an effort to get us established again to where, number one, we can deal with those 1,500 cases that aren't being assigned. And then you'll see later in this presentation, there's an ask to establish proactive units who can go after just exactly what Commissioner Cuny was talking about. Let's go after the people who are, committing organized crime and as an organization going after construction sites, construction yards, doing commercial burglaries. So there is a request to add bodies to do just that.
Yeah, and let alone this, we hear it, I'm sure you guys hear it too, going around from citizens that, like, I call and nothing happens. It's like.
And they're right.
Yeah. And then the other thing, just recently I saw, just come across, I would say yesterday actually, on Twitter, that, Como News was reporting that, like, there's some new violent cartel that's starting up in Yakima, which I'm assuming then follows the interstates.
Yes.
So some drug cartel, is that true?
yeah, it is true. The cartels are stronger than ever, Commissioner. Contrary to what we were sold when they legalized marijuana, that cartels would go away, illegal marijuana would go away. Illegal marijuana is more prevalent than it's ever been. And that is the precursor to every other drug that the cartels are selling. Fentanyl is coming across the border in numbers that we can't even calculate anymore. The estimate is there's been so much fentanyl sent over the border that it can kill every person in the United States. And our goal has always been not to allow Spokane County, Spokane City to become a hub. We're starting to see evidence of that fact is starting to happen to us. When that happens, you will read in the papers that it's not just Yakima that this cartel is, it will be here. We need to do things and take actions to prevent Spokane County from being established as a permanent hub for drug trafficking.
One thing I would like to point out in these books is you'll see on the business justification sheet on the bottom, it says related capital. There are a number of those capital costs that, as you know, we buy once every 10 years, once every 5 years. Those are the full costs. So like weapons, it includes the outright purchase, but typically we're amortizing those costs over a period of time. Under tab 3, this is, once again, this is in the spirit of trying to refine what we do and make it more focused and more effective with regard to the specific workloads that we have. This is a reclassification of an existing position, so you'll see the fiscal impact, and I would argue that since the position's already filled, we already have somebody in it, there really isn't a change in the benefit cost, it's simply a change in the salary cost. So what we're doing is we're taking a forensic technician, currently filled, current position, and converting that to what we consider a forensic specialist position. So the difference in the salary table between those two positions is about $3,200 a year. But part of the focus of this request is that right now we rely heavily on the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab to do ballistics analysis for us. The wait time on some of these cases is approximately 2 years, give or take. And that's a long time to leave a case open. You lose witnesses, you lose memories of witnesses. If you have any transient population involved in the case, they've probably moved on by then. And so this would allow us, like I say, to take a position that in the spirit of efficiency used to be very much involved in a lot of the paper tracking systems that we use for reporting. Since we incorporated Axon, the digital record keeping system into what we do when we brought on body cameras, this has freed up a fair amount of time in this position. So we'd like to basically refocus this position on really being a ballistic specialist, to being able to work through that workload and not rely as heavily on the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab for our evidence results. So again, that's item number 3, is the reclassification of a ballistic specialist.
And while you're there, so that's the software that, saves all the recordings and all that for the body cams and all of that.
Right.
And so as other places are looking at bringing on, like the elections department, video recordings, is that something that they can be using that system instead of being using a server system that is expensive? And since this is already something within the county, these are the things that I want to make sure we're looking at holistically around the county, that if you've already got a system that we could do that, then how do we do that and save those costs?
So digital file management, digital file storage is extremely expensive. And one of the things that was most attractive about working with Axon is anything that's captured through an Axon camera, they will provide the storage at no cost. And so, and the reason I want to differentiate that is there are often times where we will go out and we'll get video footage from, it might be somebody's Ring doorbell, it might be a nearby business that has security cameras set up, and there's value to getting a copy of that video. Anything that we import into our system, we pay for that storage. If it's captured through an Axon product, like a body camera, they cover that storage cost for free. And it, like I say, it can be substantial, and that was one of the big motivators for us to change systems. So what we've done is not only done the body cameras for collecting that digital evidence, but we've now converted our interview rooms into having Axon cameras, because anything that we capture during those interviews is now captured on an Axon product. It therefore is stored on Axon digital storage at no additional cost to us. I would, I guess my recommendation would be for elections to sit down with Axon, with our representative, and take a look at, is there a benefit to utilizing Axon cameras for video surveillance, I guess, and then be able to store that as part of the Axon system. I mean, I think the one thing that we would probably want to do is figure out how there's some sort of, I guess, divide in the storage system between the elections files and our criminal justice files.
If we with separate contract, that'd be very simple. So,
Right.
Yeah,
and
no.
the Axon would enter into an agreement with elections. Elections have a firewall built, so that's not an issue for us.
So I guess I'm just saying that, so Scott, is there's any other camera needs that we have to look at that, even in detention services and all of that.
I suspect that you say it's at no additional cost, but they build it into the cost of the cameras.
Right.
So I think
Right.
it's a good idea to look
Right.
at some similarities in applications, so that we're not having 5 different applications throughout. So just being able to evaluate what that cost is versus other costs as well.
No, but as we're looking at new cameras, then maybe that's a better way to do it than than is a camera that's, they're having to, because I know part of the comments were that we didn't have the surveillance cameras up because we didn't have a server in yet.
Right.
And a server's expensive.
Yeah.
And, and then, as we've known, we've had some of the issues with deleting of video footage and all of that, so.
For the jail, Axon would be a perfect fit. Body cameras and surveillance. I would talk with Axon and take a good look, because we had to weigh both of these. Don't go with Axon, go with a different camera, build your own servers, the whole. That's why we went with Axon. It was much cheaper than having to build your own servers and maintain your own servers.
And I know that the elections office just installed a new system as well with grant money from the state. They went with the program that Risk Management recommended and uses. So I think as we do look at this stuff, and even as we look at campus security in the future, which we're really starting to hone in on, these are things that we definitely should be working on together, or asking questions of people that are using certain things to make sure we're getting the best bang for our buck. And to your point, being consistent where we can.
Right. And I know we've had some discussions about, should there be more consistency and compatibility on campus security cameras with regard to where we are also using security cameras within the law enforcement area, so.
Right, well, and it just makes sense that you're the ones investigating a lot of these things. If we're using a system that then works for them, so.
Right. I'm gonna come back to the street crimes unit, so I'm gonna come back to tab 4. I'm gonna go to tab 5 really quick. So tab 5, again, similar to the ballistic specialist, is a reclassification of an existing position. And what we're finding is, what we'd like to do is create a specialization for a missing persons coordinator. And I think, again, John can explain why this type of position is of growing importance. But we currently have an STA 2 position that we would like to convert to this missing persons coordinator. And so I think what we did is we compared an STA 2 to an STA 3 for compensation purposes. So we do think there's about a $3,000 per year difference in cost. Once again, it's a position that is currently filled that we'd be converting, so I don't believe that there's an additional benefits cost to it. And then John, do you want to speak to why this?
Yeah, the necessity of this, the STA 2 job description and what we were actually having this person do were not aligning. Frankly, a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of requirements that go into our missing persons program, juvenile runaways. This is not just simply taking the report, creating a file, and waiting for them to show back up. There's a lot of having to go out, talk to families, find records, and by the nature of we don't assign them to detectives, where major crimes detectives are busy working robbery cases, murder cases, things like that. So this coordinator ends up taking a lot of responsibility of contacting families, getting dental records, actually tracking down some of these missing people. And again, a lot of it is runaways, building relationships with runaways, and really kind of wading through a lot of family drama that goes along with some of this. It's actually pretty impressive to watch what this coordinator ends up doing and saving a ton of detective work, so we can focus. What I always say is our gun carriers can do gun carrier things, but we have a civilian here who has shown a great ability to do some of the things that need to be done at a substantial cost savings. But in the meantime, this person's been working out of classification, really, so to speak. So it's really just trying to align a classification up to what they're actually doing. And it's going to cost a little bit more money.
Okay. I'd like to go back to tab 4. Tab 4 is about the creation of a street crimes unit. And the way that we've set up the supplemental budget request system, while it's one request to create this unit, it ultimately looks like 3 requests. And so essentially what you see is a total of 8 detectives and 1 sergeant to supervise this unit. The way it's presented is that 4 of the detectives would be Spokane Valley specific, and 4 of them would be Spokane County specific, and then overseen by a sergeant. I can debate both sides of this. I mean, the other potential is that you just have 8 and that they're shared positions and each jurisdiction pays 50%. Financial
So
impact would be the same.
let me interject. The
Yes.
reason it's presented this way, we really do not have any intent of having them be 4 solely dedicated by the county, 4 solely dedicated by the valley. If both sides agree that this is a worthwhile unit and they want to fund it, they will be 8 50-50 positions and a 50-50 sergeant position. It's presented this way solely because we're dealing with 2 legislative bodies that have to decide whether they want to fund it. So there's some, it's presented this way as a contingency of, well, if the valley decides they don't want to fund it and the county does, then we have a proactive team in the county to do what they need to do, and vice versa. The valley, our presentation to the valley also asks for a sergeant with the contingent that the valley, or that the county decides not to. But our intent is to run this as a proactive unit that is going to, use the intelligence developed from our intelligence group and go out and proactively go after organized criminal organizations. That's what their job's gonna be, whether it's property crime, commercial burglaries, whether it's drug crime, things like that. They will attack all of that in conjunction with the intelligence group. And it will be a shared unit if it is implemented as asked.
One caveat. We've asked the city of Spokane Valley to sit in our strategic planning for the last 3 years. We're going to be bringing them in next week, and we're going to be asking one clear question. What direction are you going? Because we don't get any direction. The crime that we're seeing cuts across all jurisdictional boundaries. And it's time for the valley to make certain decisions about their capabilities to end the crime that we're seeing. And that means they need to help us with the strategic goals and strategic planning for the valley. That is going to be stressed very, very firmly to them, that they can't just be on automatic pilot and think that the county's going to be able to carry the load. They need to be part of the solution.
The one thing about the street crimes unit, I'll say this as being the non-law enforcement guy here, is, as we start, the sheriff's office is a large operation with a lot of complexity. And so oftentimes in me trying to keep this straight in my head, going, well, wait a minute, doesn't the SVIU and SCIU focus on property crimes? Why are these guys focusing on property crimes too? It is a different layer. So this, as John mentioned, this unit is really looking at the more organized crime efforts that may be involved in organized crimes on property crimes, organized crimes with regard to drugs, things like that, where the other individual units are more the one-offs. It's the sole proprietor as opposed to the organized crime element, as I understand it. So like I said, this is the more sophisticated. These are involving much bigger impacts to our community and higher level of complexity.
Rather than trying to run these gang operations on overtime, as we came to you for $100,000 this year, we should be running this consistently across the board. The valley has not come through with any additional monies for that. John can tell you that we've been greatly successful in rounding up and putting the major gang players in jail. The operation has been very successful, but it's set to die when the overtime runs out. We're living in an era that we need to make sure that we're keeping that constant pressure, because the groups that we're dealing with are involved in moving stolen property, stolen guns, drugs, and quite frankly, trafficking young females. So this unit is designed to cover that spectrum.
Okay.
So that I understand, so if the city of the valley does not agree to pick up the cost of 4, would your position be that we should go ahead and hire the 4?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We can't, we honestly, we cannot be short in this area anymore.
Yeah.
Because the way we're set up right now, those 7 property crimes detectives, they do property and drug crimes. So they're being reactive. They get these burglary cases assigned to them, but we kind of cheat from handling those kinds of cases for them to take the time to go do some of this proactive stuff. I mean, they're trying to plug the holes in the dam with, more fingers and toes than they have. And even 4 will help us attack this a little more aggressively. I mean, this becomes a completely proactive approach as opposed to reactive, which we need.
Yeah, where I was going, where I was not sure about was it 8, regardless of whether the city comes in, or it's 4, and if the city comes in, it's 8. That's what I was trying to get to.
I'll be honest, I can use 8.
Oh, sure.
There's work there for 8,
No,
but
I get that.
is that reasonable?
Yeah.
Is there work for 8? And if you would fund it, would that be fantastic? Sure. Is it reasonable? I don't know.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
it goes back to the same thing I just mentioned now. It's time for the valley to get off automatic pilot.
Right.
They need to become actively engaged in planning the future of law enforcement. We're stronger together. We keep trying to, communicate with them that they need to engage. But there are certain positions in the training aspect that I've asked the county to solely fund. Those positions, regardless if the valley is with us or not, are vital. And I've just stopped trying to design an agency worrying about what the valley's going to do. I'm focused on an agency that can deal with the crime that Spokane County has to deal with, and we continue to look at the valley and go, will you please engage?
Okay.
And really, it's 5 head count technically, right? 'Cause
With
you
the
still need
sergeant,
the sergeant.
4 detectives and a sergeant.
That would also include the backup, the vehicle and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff, so.
Thank you.
Fully loaded.
I can get you
Got
one.
it.
Okay, we covered tab 5. Let's go to tab 6. So tab 6, and I can argue both sides of this issue. So we have a couple of joint task force that we participate in. And we participate with law enforcement at the federal level and at the state level, and with local law enforcement. When we participate in those, we provide people of different ranks to those task forces. So we may provide a deputy, we may provide a detective, those kinds of things. I'm not sure if we're providing any sergeants, but those joint task
Yeah,
forces.
we do have a sergeant assigned to the Regional Safe Streets Task Force.
So oftentimes when they get assigned to these joint task force, their workload looks very similar, or I should say the types of work that they do. So, so from an HR perspective, you have this concept that is inherent in HR that says equal pay for equal work. If you've got equal job descriptions and equal tasks, you should be compensated equally. And so this recognizes that you've got deputies working side by side with detectives, and their workload looks very similar. The counter argument is that if you are a detective, that you have oversight responsibilities that you may not have as a detective, as a deputy, and that this provides more opportunities for deputies to be able to expand into other areas without or before they're promoted. So, so we present this one to you because there's always a chance that you will have somebody that files a grievance, and that we have to deal with it, and then we'll be called to walk through that debate of, is this equal pay for equal work? So, so I bring this to you as a potential union/HR issue, to just know that it's one we should be aware of.
It's not one we've had a grievance on recently.
Correct.
And technically, isn't that what our out of class pay policies and contract language should be covering? If they truly are doing the exact same work, they would be getting the out of class pay.
Traditionally, Traditionally, we have not been providing it, kind of the way the union has approached it in the 25 years I've been with the sheriff's office is it's an opportunity for somebody to get out of patrol, develop a different skill set, things like that. And it's been a benefit to the member, so it's been left alone. I will say, generally speaking, and when I say generally, I'm not saying 50% of the time, I'm saying about 90% of the time, the deputy that we place in that position ends up promoting to detective while in that position.
It's almost like a training rules, like
It-
they kind
it
of get their
does.
feet wet and then it
Yeah.
branches them.
And so part of this is also to just resolve the issue of us, we get them into that position a year later, they score high enough on the detective's test that they have to go to a detective and then we pull them out, put them somewhere else in the investigative division to bring somebody else in, or we end up converting that position to a detective position because that's the skilled person who's got the institutional knowledge to be there. There are only 2 places right now in the investigative division that have deputy positions. And it would not be a heavy lift. And I'll be honest, the people who are in those deputy positions are high enough on the promotional list that they're gonna end up being a detective while they're in those spots. So it could end up being, just kind of more of the same.
This is just an acknowledgement, we have not been paying out of class while they've been serving that position. And if we felt that we were in a position where we had to, the cost implications is most likely that it would be about the same, maybe even slightly less by just going ahead and converting this position.
And I will correct Todd a little bit. The functions that they're performing as the deputies there are not similar, they're identical.
Do they have the same oversight though that we would see in?
Our detectives, and to play the game of, hey, the oversight, the deputy might be overseen by a detective as an assignment, but it's only one. And actually in the DEA position, there is no county supervisor over there. There's no detective supervising them. It's the Safe Streets sergeant who actually is their first line supervisor within the agency. They report directly at the DEA to the RAC, the resident agent in charge. So it's, again, there could be an issue. It has not been, the union has not been problematic that way. But it is, again, operationally, it just may make more sense to do it this way.
So I want to jump into tab 7 because this is the Rig 9 Regional Intelligence Group, and the rest of them are, I believe, for the most part, pretty specific requests within each one. But this one is a multifaceted request within the Rig 9, and so it consists of 4 separate requests. Again, the Rig 9 is the Regional Intelligence Group. Just like I say, to avoid acronyms because I know we throw them out frequently. But this is really our ability to do intelligence-led policing. It really is about trying to figure out if there's possible ways for us to identify trends and to determine threats ahead of time. So as we take a look at the Rig 9, and again, this is one that John is far more familiar with than I am. So request number 1 is the utilization of 4 investigative analysts. And you'll see on page 2 of this, the business justification. Again, detectives tend to promote in and out, so they move through the investigative division. Investigative analysts are civilian that develop an expertise, and it may be everything from being able to strip data from electronic devices, using a multitude of methods, and then just looking at other social media investigative work. But these are the people that tend to stay with us, develop their expertise, and really become outstanding assets as part of our investigative unit.
I know Al's gonna wrap up.
Yep. So I will circle back with you.
I want to mention something before Al leaves, so you all have it all together. I just spent 14 days in May and 9 days this month in counterterrorism training. We talk about what this type of unit does. I will tell you, at a worldwide basis and high level, our rig is slightly ahead in some areas. So this, where we're going with this is the direction that most agencies are fighting to get to, and we're closing in on.
You bet. And then many of the people who are in these positions typically come from other agencies. So some of them are retired military that specialize in intelligence gathering or other law enforcement agencies. So like I say, often they bring that expertise with them.
So I want to elaborate a little bit on the value of these individuals. Traditionally, and everybody here knows the growth of electronics and digital evidence and data has exploded exponentially over the last 10 or 15 years. We all know how complicated and how difficult it can be to keep up with the way technology is changing. We found that with detectives, that as cell phones came on and we started getting more and more evidence of crimes on the internet, on social media, on cell phones, on digital media, that we had detectives who we'd send to training to learn how to read data, collate data. They'd go to the class, they'd maybe do a couple cases, and then they'd promote, or they'd retire, or they'd do something else, and they never developed an expertise, and we just kept paying for the training over and over and over again. The job market, being able to find detectives and find commissioned law enforcement people tightened up, and we had a National Guard analyst who is he's a chief warrant officer, I believe, which is a technical expertise in counterterrorism and intelligence gathering, who was working for us at the Safe Streets Task Force. The National Guard was moving away from having analysts dedicated to the counter-drug program. I took the opportunity to hire this person, and I had to tell my detectives, listen, this person is an expert in doing a lot of the things that we expect our detectives do. Let's bring him over, let's give him a chance. We converted a detective position to the analyst position. And within 4 months, every single one of my detectives found that to be an invaluable addition to our investigative team. We've now been able to grow that. We just hired 2 more investigative analysts. We've stolen one from the DEA, and we just brought over a retired intelligence officer from the Spokane Police Department and brought him on as a civilian. They both start October 1st. The capability that these positions are going to give us is going to be several-fold. As Todd indicated, this has a lot to do with developing intelligence out of our communities. I can tell you that just recently, with our violent crime trends, because of the work these analysts are doing and the work that the Regional Intelligence Group have done, you all saw the sheriff talking about that shootout at Crestline and Sprague earlier in the spring. Because of the work and the surveillance that this group has done, we have identified all the people involved in that shooting, and we will end up charging them. We have identified what's called an OCDF case, an organized drug trafficking case, solely from the work that this intelligence group has done. That's what intelligence-led policing does. That's what it's about. It is unacceptable that we're at the leading edge of this nationwide. Most every other agency should be doing this. And it's because we have taken the approach of we can use exceptionally well qualified civilians to supplement the work of the commissioned people. We can use these people and their expertise to identify criminal organizations, to become experts in electronic surveillance. Believe it or not, expertise in human intelligence gathering, which means developing relationships in the community with people who can provide us and trust us to give us the information we need to deny people the opportunity to commit crimes, disrupt organizations who are going to commit crimes, or dismantle them once they have. That is the mantra for the intelligence group. And just to be honest with you, we were very concerned that there was going to be a mass casualty event leading up to the parade downtown and into Hoop Fest. So with the intelligence group and the Safe Streets Task Force, they spent 3 months ahead of those 2 events, making sure that they were surveilling and investigating anyone who might be a gang member who might actually go in and commit a violent crime at Hoop Fest. And they put them all in jail before Hoop Fest occurred, and we did not have an event. That's the kind of things that happen when you utilize an intelligence group. There's just an absence of crime. But I can tell you, with the help of the prosecutor's office and with the help of judges who were on board with this program, we made sure that they were in jail and that they stayed there so they could not commit a violent crime in any of those large public events.
The efforts we're talking about are the efforts that prevent us from becoming that headline Yakima has become. We, as John said, we were fairly concerned about a mass shooting at our big events, and we were able to disrupt and put them all away before those happened.
I will give you another additional example. And the reason I'm telling you this is because the work that this group does, you will never know what they do. They were the group that was picking up online chatter about some potential conflict up at the recent Meade School Board meeting. And that, it wasn't anything that was directed at the actual school board, but we knew that there were online chatter, electronic chatter about groups who were outside of the Meade School District coming in to have conflict with each other. That group stayed on top of it, provided the intelligence, and actually ran an operation up there to make sure that it kept safe. That's what this group does.
The second request within Rig 9 is for a crime analyst position. I know that some of these titles begin to blur. What's the difference between an investigative analyst and a crime analyst? I think the crime analyst is more of an IT person with a specialized emphasis in law enforcement. So this is really about running the data reports, running the analysis of that data, so that when somebody says, can you tell me what's going on with crime trends within this geographic footprint? This is the person that's doing that data related thing with regard to law enforcement, okay? And I know, as the budget office knows, we get more and more requests for information from those that we provide law enforcement to. And the ability to have somebody that specializes in that, then learning it like once, twice, 3 times a year is extremely beneficial. The third request in Rig 9 is to create 2 detective positions. As John has mentioned, this is a group that really tries to implement intelligence-led policing and get ahead of it. I would say that our focus has really been about what's going on locally, but we also recognize that we have a tie-in with law enforcement and Homeland Security at the federal level. So there is a need, just based on the size of our jurisdiction, to understand when you have certain people coming through our area that have already been identified as national threats, so that you're aware of that, so you can track that activity, you can determine whether or not Spokane is going to be just a passing through area, or whether there's any potential problems that may occur in this area. We also take a look at a lot of focuses from like JAG grants, the Department of Justice, and Homeland Security is really about domestic terrorism, and the idea about identifying potential targets of domestic terrorism that could take down a community or at least incapacitate it for an extended period of time, whether it be water systems, transportation systems, anything like that. And so this is really about trying to find a couple positions that are dedicated to tracking and intervening at that level, which right now, while we're aware that there's a need that exists, we have not had the resources to dedicate anybody to that.
We currently have 1 detective, and to put specific activities on your radar that these people would be investigating, not only will it be developing informants into all crimes, but Spokane traditionally has been and will for the foreseeable future be a hub for white neo-Nazi groups, things like that. We show that there's a resurgence coming in here for that. We see evidence of it, but we don't have great visibility into it because we don't have the resources to dedicate to tracking it. But we also know that we have groups from the other side, such as Antifa and groups like that, showing up in this area, in this region. And we need to have better visibility, a better understanding of who exactly they are and what exactly they're doing. And we need to staff this appropriately. And these particular detectives, these analysts, will be experts in developing human intelligence. And that will be the generator for our intelligence-led policing, not only for domestic terrorism, international terrorism, but also for local formalized, organized groups that conduct criminal activity. It is going to be their job to develop sources of information for that.
Contrary to our media's denial that Antifa was here in 2020, Antifa was here in 2020, and Antifa has identified a high-value target they want in Spokane County. We know that. So we're paying attention across the threat spectrum. Commissioners, I've lived through 4 presidential administrations. Under Bush, I had to worry about the extreme left, Alpha, Antifa, and that group. Under Obama, more of the right end of their extremists. So with President Trump, it was both sides. And under Biden, both sides have not stopped. We have intelligence that that keeps coming in, and that's just the domestic side of life. The information that I received in my travels this year, we really messed up when we left Afghanistan. The threat that's coming out of Afghanistan could be a major threat. We are a international border state. 90 miles is a border. So there's all kinds of issues that we, as the largest metro area between Seattle, St. Paul, north of Denver, and Salt Lake, face as a region.
The last request under the Rig 9 is our effort to be proactive, because it's something that the county can always get better at. I know that most of you are familiar with the public safety building. As I walk through that building, to me it looks like a collage of minute remodeling projects that had no cohesive vision. And so I don't mean to be overly critical of it, but really it doesn't look like a master plan was followed in that building after decades of just, like say, a remodel here and a remodel there. As we've talked about the Rig 9 intelligence-led policing and real-time crime center, the second floor of the public safety building has long been less than efficient in the use of its square footage. There's the old jail site that has just become basically squatters' rights as you walk through the old jails, where everybody's just kind of dropped stuff in those rooms and nobody knows who it belongs to and who's got the keys to what door. So there's some inefficiently used space on the second floor, starting, like I say, in the old jail area and then extending kind of westward to where our old roll call room was. It's now in the basement. We would like to go in, working with facilities, and remodel that and put the real-time crime center and intelligence-led policing based in one area, so it doesn't become bifurcated where you've got part of the team in one part of the building, part of it in another. As John has mentioned, this unit works closely together. They share information, and to the extent that we can have space where that can happen and can facilitate that type of use is to our advantage. So this is really the acknowledgement that says we'd like to get ahead of this a little bit and really try to create this space before these positions can be brought on. Okay. Going quickly through, with regard to, like I said, we've been focused on the investigative division. With that, there is some M&O supply. So this is behind tab 8. If you go to the second page, it gives you specifically the items that we're talking about. These are tools specifically used for investigative work and analysis. Oftentimes, there are different variations of software. The one thing I will tell you that I've learned in this process is some of these software vendors attempt to recoup their R&D in the first year purchase. And so you'll see the first year cost is higher, and then and it's a subscriber-based system. And then in subsequent years, it drops substantially. So like item number 2, the cloud analyzer software, $8,000 in year 1, but after that, it's $1,000 a year. Item number 4, $4,900 the first year, and then it drops to $800 a year. So you'll see most of these are really software-based systems or tools utilized to assist in the investigative process. Item number 9 then is the capital associated with this investigate strategic planning request. And once again, these are pieces of equipment. They range substantially in price. Everything from the cameras that we use in our processing lab that have ended or have come to the end of their useful life. So everything from $2,500, with the most expensive item being a recovery system. That's to recover latent fingerprints tied to the use of weapons at $80,000 for the purchase of that piece of equipment. The one thing I will say about Faraday, so you'll see that it's both the Faraday bags as well as a locker tent. So the idea is if you've got a piece of digital equipment, like a cell phone, laptop, anything like that, oftentimes in investigations, especially crimes against people, there are files that the person attempted to erase or to hide. And so, so the idea is once you take them as evidence, you need to protect them from being able to be stripped remotely. So out in the field, they use the Faraday bags, place the electronic equipment in the Faraday bag for transport purposes. And again, it prevents somebody from stripping the evidence off of it before you get it to our facility to be able to do that. Once you enter the public safety building down in the forensics unit, and you bring the unit in and you take it out of the bag, you can't simply just put it on a shelf, because even though internet coverage isn't great in the public safety building, it still potentially can be stripped remotely. And so then the issue is you actually need to have a Faraday, what they call a locker, or a bigger space that you can store these pieces of equipment in, and you can actually do the analysis in that's protected again from outside stripping of the evidence and of the data. So so that's just a clarification with regard to when we refer to Faraday technology, that's what it is. Tab 10, and this is where we get into the training unit. So if you could go to the next tab, please. And again, a large piece of this has been in response to the legislative reforms. And so what this does is this request creates 3 positions, and then we have software for training. So the STA2 position is an administrative support position. This really serves 2 purposes. One is to help us track, schedule, coordinate in-service training to be able to meet the requirements of the legislative reforms. This person also will assist us in scheduling for the new facility, the new training facility, especially if we're trying to maximize the use of the firing range with outside organizations. But then the other thing that this position is responsible for is there are substantially more requirements with regard to record keeping. And so what we need to do is we need to document, every time somebody's received their training and what their training was, and sign-in sheets, all that kind of stuff. And so there has been an additional administrative burden placed on law enforcement agencies as a result of the reforms. And so the STA2 position is a recognition of that. The second position is a quartermaster position. And I did say that, going back to the SAR, like say when we're moving money around, now the Air Force is stepping in and backfilling some of this money. There is some of the general fund budget that is freed up a little bit that we could potentially move into these positions so that the net cost of shared positions remains the same. And so quartermaster position is, we have a ton of equipment. And we just received our notice that once again, our annual asset inventory requirement is due, which is, since I arrived, it was basically a manual system on an Excel spreadsheet. The quartermaster is really to go towards a military type system where you have one-stop shop for the issuance of equipment, the issuance and tracking of all those serial numbers that go with it, so that when that person leaves the agency, we know exactly what inventory is assigned to that individual. And so this is probably the equivalent of about an accounting tech 4. We just call them the quartermaster to be more explicit in describing what this person's function is. But again,
So are you not, I guess my question is, are you not doing that now?
Not very well, no.
Not very well. And right now it's a very bifurcated, inefficient system. So the SWAT unit, for example, they issue equipment, they try to track serial numbers and inventory and that. the K-9 unit, that all the different units are all tracking their own inventory. We've got to try to figure out, it's all done in different formats, done by different individuals with different styles. And so this is really an effort for efficiency purposes, recognizing that we have a lot of money invested in equipment in, with regard to law enforcement. So this is to centralize it, and this is to be able to track it better. And I will say that under the M&O line, part of the software is the software used for inventory tracking. The third position is a curriculum writer. Again, we are asked to make sure that our curriculum is best practices. So it's not only updating it to make sure that it meets or exceeds all of the new statutory requirements and WAC requirements that have been imposed on law enforcement in the state of Washington, but it's also to make sure that once we adjust our curriculum, then to go and have it certified or accredited by national organizations, so that if we are subject to a lawsuit, that we can show that we've documented the curriculum, that it's best practices, and that it's been recognized as accredited by national organizations. That is the one that the sheriff referenced, that we have been working really hard on this. When we work with Steve Bartell and he says, you know, what do we train to if we're not convinced the Criminal Justice Training Commission is meeting all the requirements? He says, train to the gap. Well, the gap is large. And so to make sure that we're doing all of this, the curriculum writer would be basically the person responsible to make sure that all of our training is compliant with those state and federal requirements, to make sure that it's best practices, to make sure it's accredited. And then, so I've kind of been skipping through, like,
But I can give you an example on this curriculum writing piece. It has to be done. All of our training, we need to have curriculum that is defensible, that it's based off of valid job task analysis. As an example, we just had to rewrite our firearms curriculum, and I had to take one of my Safe Streets Task Force detectives, who is a master firearms instructor, and he went over and wrote the curriculum for 5 weeks. So I took 5 weeks of detective time out, where we are not out solving crime, so that person can write curriculum, because they were a subject matter expert. So the work's getting done. It just means we're taking away from the public safety stuff that's getting done.
So, but did he go over to the state and was helping the
Nope.
state rewrite
No,
it?
he was out at our training center because our curriculum was legally defensible. We had to make sure our curriculum was legally defensible. If the state wants it, they can have it.
We actually wrote it in conjunction with multiple agencies throughout the state. We've done that with all the high-risk curricula. And we've had it certified through Analyst, Tri-Cities.
Yeah, was it Richland?
Pasco. Pasco's chief has worked very, very well with us and has given us subject matter experts to do these rewrites. However, whenever we do this, we're taking away from the law enforcement side, and to have a curriculum writer that can do this job for a little bit less money than having a detective or a sergeant be pulled from their duties to do it.
Yeah, it just seems like your association, though, why they're not helping drive this and do this is,
What was that?
why your association, your state association, I can't think of the
Criminal
acronym.
Justice Commission.
WASPIC.
WASPIC?
Right. No, but that's,
Astute observation.
I mean, that's who should be
They
helping.
should be, but they have been sitting on the sidelines and quite frankly, have been derelict in this duty. And it took a core group of law enforcement agencies from across the state, and they came to us. We led the way on this. And that's now why CJTC has come to us. And my lead curriculum writer, Tony Anderman, is going to be helping rewrite the Basic Law Enforcement Academy. But Mary, a very astute comment as far as WASPIC. WASPIC has been a paper tiger for the last 6 years on this issue. They refuse to engage.
And ultimately, it should be the Criminal Justice Training Commission that is pushing this out.
Yeah, it should be
But
the
again,
state.
they're asking us to provide one of our resources to to develop the curriculum for just the basic law enforcement academy, not to mention the hundreds of other courses that they put out. And we know to be legally defensible, it has to have a curriculum tied to a job task analysis and all that stuff.
Yeah,
And they just haven't done it.
Which I would like to see an invoice to them, not that they'll pay it. But I mean, literally, I mean, they put enough unfunded mandates on us, and that's just, again, shirking their responsibility onto us to take care of something that they're legally responsible to do.
I agree with you, Commissioner. However, the stakes are too high.
No, I mean, so, I mean,
Do
like
it,
I say,
yeah.
after the fact, let's just send them saying, this is what it cost us to do your job. To make sure we've done it right.
I've attempted to engage the state for 3 years on this, Marcus Riccelli. And Marcus has done nothing but give me lip service. He's never met with us. Billig is the same way. We have raised this flag to the state, not just through the CJTC vein, the WASPIC vein, all 30, well, I shouldn't say all 38, because King County is now an appointed sheriff and can't do it, but 38 of the 39 sheriffs send a letter to the governor and the AG's office and CJTC last fall, I should say, asking them to help us fix the curricula that is legally indefensible. No response from the governor's office. And again, we talked with Riccelli and Billig last fall and this spring, and to this date, they have not met with us. And I cannot have the county hanging out with this type of liability because it just cost us $1 million, and I refuse to have another settlement like that.
Right, no, which I appreciate. I just think we need to identify those costs and say, here's what it's really costing for us to do your work.
I think in the last few years, CJTC, there's been a lot of criticism pointing towards CJTC, and rather than listen and adjust, they've chosen to become very defensive and just say, because you're telling us we need to do this, we're not going to do it. I would say that in the last 6 months, we're beginning to see maybe some calmer heads emerge to where there's more dialogue. And I think they're starting to warm up to the idea that they need to update their curriculum. They're starting to reach out in a more participatory manner. And so I would say that we are at the early stages across law enforcement in the state of starting to rebuild relationships and realizing that it is something that is in everyone's best interest to try to fix. It's just taken a long time for some of the egos to retire and move on, and for us to be able to start having this dialogue.
But we have asked the state ad nauseum to help, and there's been no help.
Under tab 13 in your book is the last tab we have for our strategic plan request. These are the M&O items tied to the training unit. In the second page, specifically, there are 2 software packages that really go towards, addressing the needs for the training division. One software package is a background software. What we realize is that as people go through the background process, trying to have them submit their information in one format that then is visible and accessible by multiple steps along the process, that there's value to that right now. One step of the process will say, I'm still waiting on this document, and the applicant, their frustration saying, I already submitted that to somebody else in the process. Why aren't you seeing it? And so this just streamlines the process under this ESOP background. My understanding is it allows the applicant to provide input at one point and then allows numerous technologies to be able to access it off of that. So a lot of from my understanding, a lot of the common HR software is compatible with this. So it's kind of just a central funnel, I guess, gathering point. The second one is the collective data, typo under, it's not collective date, it's collective data software package. That is the inventory package that goes along with the quartermaster system. But once again, trying to consolidate this process, use one technology and not have it bifurcated amongst multiple individuals and units. That is our strategic plan submittal. Hopefully, again, you recognize the common theme in all of this is we're trying to enhance, to improve our efforts to be able to investigate crime and be able to bring justice to victims. There are, at the very end, under the last tab, there are some miscellaneous requests that fall outside the strategic plan, but that are still important to the agency. One you'll see is an extra help position for the air support unit. 2 pages into that, you'll see the justification. We are the air support unit. I think everybody thinks it's just helicopters. It's also probably the bigger component of the air support unit is drones. We use drones for a number of purposes, whether it's crime scene investigation, whether it's traffic collision reconstruction, SWAT surveillance, those kinds of things. And so those call outs are increasing. They require people who are trained and certified to operate them, but the equipment also requires maintenance. We have video that we have to store, and so right now we're doing that all with overtime. The unit is also up for accreditation, and so again, like with regard to the helicopters, we want to make sure that we're demonstrating we're utilizing best practices, that we're incorporating the safest standards. That does have an impact on our insurance rates at the county. And then kind of on a longer term basis, at the end of this year, we will gain clear title to the second Huey helicopter. At that point, that is an owned asset. We do have I don't want to say a long-term strategy, but a medium-term strategy to do some consolidation with regard to our helicopter fleet. Right now, we have 2 surveillance helicopters, we have 2 Hueys, and I believe we have 1 or 2 parts helicopters making up our total helicopter fleet. We do not own the 2 surveillance helicopters, those are on loan to us, but we will own the 2 Hueys. We think there's significant value in the second Huey. We'd like to be able to sell that off once we have clear title, return the 2 surveillance ones that are getting quite old, purchase 1 new surveillance helicopter and 1 rescue helicopter. So we'd go from a fleet of 4 to a fleet of 2. That should create more efficiency with regard to operational costs, as well as the costs associated with making sure that those are all certified to be in the air and those kinds of things. So that's a little bit, like I say, a longer term conversation, but to do that requires a project manager. And so when we think about what would an extra help person do, they're non-commissioned, it's part-time, but they'd be able to take up some of these tasks that otherwise we'd be performing with overtime for people in that unit. The last sheet in your book is a list of miscellaneous capital projects. I apologize, I'll bring you a supplement. I did not realize until just before walking over here that the columns did not align. So user error on my part. I will get you a cleaner copy so it's easier to read. But you'll see that these are a number of miscellaneous requests. Some of them are small dollar requests that range from cold weather gear for the SWAT team, straps that are part of the maintenance program for the helicopter, those kinds of things. Additional magazines for the AR rifles. And then we also have some significant cost items as well. We need a new dive boat or boat for the dive team. Right now we have one that we utilize from the Marine Enforcement. They're set up to do 2 different things. The dive boat one really needs room for all the equipment that they carry when they go do a rescue or recovery. And so, and that's one that Mike Kittle said even after he went out and spent a day with them on the boat, said, oh my God, this is just a mess. So he's actually lowered the priority for other things for specialty units, like over in the bomb squad and SWAT, and said, this one rises up in the level of importance. So, so that is the list. So please thumb through that when you have a chance. The intent of this book was to give you as much detail as you would potentially need. If you have questions on any of the items in this, if you thumb through it, please let me know and we will do our best to get you additional information or answer your questions. Actually, I do need to make up a few more of these, and so I'll make sure that you're on the list as a recipient.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a lot of information. I think I will definitely have more questions. I do have a 10:30 offsite that I've got to be at, so I'm becoming late for. So it was a good thing you had extra time to start as well.
Thank you.
So thank you all for being here and presenting. I appreciate all the information, and I'm sure I will be back in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So that's going to conclude our meeting for this morning, and we will reconvene today at 2:00.
Thank you.